Hi, everyone. So it's really a pleasure being back again into an ETPA Congress. I already sort of belong in the furniture, and it's really great to be. Well, I'm sorry I cannot attend personally. I had previous engagements in Portugal, and it's also a pity I'm missing being in a lovely town such as Yash. But anyway, I'm going to try to contribute. So without further ado, let me change and share a PowerPoint presentation. So here we are. Sorry about this. I wanted to talk about what I call structural energy healing. The main idea being that energy healing is a complex subject matter, and there are many things to take into account. I'm just going to talk about some of those as far as my experience and knowledge go. For starters, we see around lots indeed the techniques for spiritual healing and for self-healing. The thing is, how might they work and how do they work? For whom, in what way? And one important thing is about the healer. Lots of time we see people sort of selling, advertising for techniques, forgetting to tell us that the person or the individual healer is extremely important, because healers are themselves a presence in the field of energy where they are doing something with their clients, and their presence, the quality of the presence, the quality of the energy, how aware they are about the energy phenomena is, of course, fundamental. Also, how pure they are in their intention. So, in the Western tradition, we do have this mentality of searching for protocols, methods, and to be sure that we get evidence about general results we get through, in this case, healing procedures. Now, how far we go inside ourselves in our own spiritual path, so to call it, or our own spiritual evolution is, to me, a quite fundamental thing. Because, again, we are there with who we are. Now, a famous author that lots of people here will know about is Rupert Sheldrake. He tells us about organisms in general, because he himself is a biologist. He talks about living organisms that are everywhere, but he tells us that those living organisms are shaped by collective memory fields, meaning energy fields with information, therefore with memory. He told me personally, some time ago in a conference in Portugal, by the end of the 20th century, that what he called morphogenetic fields was actually very close to what the ancient theosophers called an etheric field and the ether bodies that they told us we all have, meaning the bodies where we have our vitality circulation happening, where we have the chakras, when we have the meridians, or what the yogic tradition calls the nadis. So those morphogenetic fields would be influencing even our development as embryos, as fetuses, and it would be influencing the workings of our chakra system, of our ether body, and therefore everything that happens in our physical, dense bodies. Sheldrake also says something like this: what you do, what you say, what you think can influence other people through morphic resonance. So he warns us there is no immortal filter in morphic resonance, which means that we have to be more careful about what we are thinking if we are concerned about the effect we have on others. Now, one interesting thing about this is that according, again, to spiritual traditions, namely the yogic tradition and some esoteric schools, it's not just about what we think, it's about where we think it from. They tell us, for instance, is that mantras that are said at the mental plane level are a lot more powerful than just uttered mantras in the physical plane. They would tell us that if we are thinking creatively from a higher place between ourselves, our thought is a lot more powerful. Unfortunately, some people that are already sort of sophisticated in that sense, they have sort of evil thoughts. But I think we are sort of protected because the higher beings, to access the very high planes of existence and of consciousness, they must purify themselves. They raise above their mortal temporary egos, and they get into a state that is highly compatible with pure love, but is incompatible with hatred. You also have a physicist, the famous one, David Bohm, telling us that we are connected everywhere with everything, but that the field we are connected is structured and influenced by our behavior and by our understanding, again, by our thought. And the consciousness, of course, we have about our thought, what we are thinking, how we are thinking it. To Sheldrake again, the morphogenetic fields are guiding energy fields that guide the development and behavior structure of living beings. They are like blueprints or habits of nature, as he tells us, that ensure living species sort of stay themselves as they grow. So they are mostly informational. And through morphic resonance, what we were, what we have been, what we thought, how we behaved in the past can influence what happens next towards the future. We would have sort of a non-local memory that can sort of spread, can, in a way like a fractal, it can vibrate, resonate across space and time. So what we learn, what we do, what we think, how we feel in one location as a human species can transfer to other humans in different locations. So too bad for what the mass media are doing to us, because they are sort of helping us have destructive patterns of thought. To Sheldrake again, the body remembers healthy states, and healing can in a way be a way for us to vibrate, resonate what we already know deep within about how to be healthy. We have this inner notion about how being healthy is. Now again, when human beings within their morphogenetic fields interact with other beings through different procedures, they are also able to influence them, not just at a close distance, but also remotely. And there are a few studies, scientific kind, of course, that sort of seem to help us believe this is right. Namely, studies on intercessory prayer, where it seems sort of obvious that when there is a group of people praying for other people, something interesting happens there. There is an influence, even when the group or the people that are the target of prayer do not know about it. This has been sort of demonstrated. So influences across space and time. Also, to Sheldrake, places have fields of memory. In a way, places remember what happened in there, and some sensitive people can access such memories. We have here, of course, an example, an area that has been in the past a battlefield, and people just walking around later on, modern times, sometimes not really knowing about what happened there and how what happened there might still be influencing them. This also happens in our bodies, actually. What happens in our bodies, the crimes or the virtuous deeds within our bodies, sort of stay around with us. They have an influence in our own personal, individual morphogenetic field. And so sometimes we need to do something about it. So trauma also leaves imprints, both in ourselves as individuals and perhaps in the landscape and perhaps in groups of people, perhaps in countries. So this means that some field patterns of energy get stuck and indeed need a reset towards something better. We need to liberate what happened. Energy work then becomes quite important, both to general groups and places in this planet of ours, but also to ourselves and to our bodies. To Sheldrake, meditation could be actually a way of repatterning morphogenetic fields, and then we could change them. But we have another author, Angwin St. Just, that tells us that traumas can spread as fractals. So traumatized people might transmit their traumas even from a distance to their children and to other people. Traumas might resonate with traumas we already have, activating them. So to her, the time things happened, how they happen and where are very important. And we have this, we have traumatic fractals replicating through history. Now let me bring here another author that I really value, Alice Bailey, famous esoteric author. She did quite a very interesting writing on esoteric healing. And she tells us, of course, totally assuming that we have a higher self, that healing is reestablishing the flow of energy that comes mostly from our higher self. To her, when soul energy is somehow blocked or distorted, we get severe trouble, either psychically or physically. And therefore, when we align our soul, mind, emotions, our chakra system, our ether body, or our morphogenetic field, with our soul, healing has a tendency to happen. And to her also, of course, the origins of disease comes from subtle planes, comes from levels that are not so directly perceived by us usually before they manifest through actual illness. And then we have this interesting idea that our ether body, where we have the chakras, is the place that distributes the life force coming from the soul. It's important to note that according to Patanjali, the main energy distributing points of our energy body are the chakras, and the chakras accumulate karma. So when we deal with the chakras, we might also be dealing with karma. And this also will be quite important. So the alignment of chakras is very important. They are harmonizing, but also the purification of the chakras. And each chakra, in a way, is also connected with patterns of personal self state, with sort of consciousness states. And because each chakra accumulates karma, chakras are also, in a way, the places of sin and deviation of our energy from the soul. Now, before I come to this, let me tell you that a friend of mine, a psychiatrist, Claudio Madaloni, that is very much into transpersonal psychiatry, he tells us that in the Divine Comedy from Dante, we have an analogy about Kundalini rising, the awakening of our deep energy that takes us towards the divine in the way that Beatrix in Dante's masterpiece takes Dante towards the divine. But before that, as it happens in the Divine Comedy, we must visit our own hell, meaning the place of our own sin or inner deviation. So the layers of hell in Dante correspond to patterns of deviation of our energy at the level of each chakra. And so Dante goes to hell, goes through the several layers connected to the chakras to purify himself. He notices the patterns of sin or deviation. He starts correcting them, namely when later he gets to the purgatory. And then, because he's now in a different purified state, and under the impulse of the feminine divine energy, he gets to the realms of the skies, the realms of heaven, in a way, meaning very high states of consciousness. So this might sort of complicate things a little bit, but it also brings extra spice to our inner adventures. So to Alice Bailey, disease is mainly a sort of a product of karma, unresolved soul essence, so what we did in the past, the deviations and the blockages that stay with us because of the way we still behave, we still think, the things we are still attached to. Then we have ongoing psychological aspects, namely fear, hatred, selfishness, self-centeredness. And we have the environment, but the environment we are talking about is not just the social immediate environment, it's not just the physical environment with pollution and with all sorts of deviating possible attractions, but it's also the collective energies environment. It's the big psychic field of the world that we are part of and that we influence either positively or negatively according to who we are, what we do, how we think. Again, the chakras are storing karma, and we might suspect that we have also planetary chakras that might also sort of being storing collective karma. And it's interesting that to Alice Bailey, some places like New York or London are the locations of the planetary chakras. And I would say that indeed those places need lots of cleansing. So again, healers are conductors of energy, and if they are in the right place, so to say, they are channeling soul pure energy through them. To do that, they must be in a pure state. They must be acting out of love and with love, not lusting for fame and fortune and power, because those things will deviate their own energy and therefore produce a distorted effect on their clients. And of course, they should aim at working with the soul of patients, helping them bringing the best of themselves to self-healing, but also perhaps to healing humanity and the planet. Now, still to Alice Bailey, a good health depends on our bodies, namely, of course, the subtle body's ability to receive life force from the soul and prana or vitality from the sun. And to her, harmful thoughts or actions are blocking and deviating this flow of energy. And one fundamental thing becomes harmlessness. And harmlessness is lacking capacity or intent to injure, to damage people or places. And so harmlessness is a quality of soul mostly, deeply connected with love, compassion, resonance from the heart with the heart of other people. Alice Bailey even tells us that supposedly being harmless is a big way for getting rid of karma, which is not surprising because it corrects distortions from the past or ongoing distortions in our energy fields in the many different ways that connect with the chakras. So energy blockages or deviations from the soul will show up in our body. I'm not going into detail here, but you have the idea as expressed in this kind of schema. Also to her and to other authors, even disease and death might be healing to the soul, because the soul is here for supposedly millions of years. So what happens temporarily is not that relevant. The relevant thing is for the soul to evolve and to be a portion of a sort of a cosmic symphony. Now, still according to the esoteric wisdom of Alice Bailey, but also to other maps of consciousness that we see in different traditions, different esoteric schools, even the yogic tradition, of course, we have our temporary personality that is mainly functioning in different layers of the physical, of the astral level and the mental. But then we have the egoic body or the causal body that is an intermediate between our personality and the higher soul. Again, not going into detail, but this is complex. Even building what is called the antakarana, the connection, the energy, but also mostly the consciousness connection to higher levels between our temporary personality and our higher soul and pure spirit eventually. Even the antakarana has two levels. The first one, we are connecting with our causal body, becoming aware probably of the reincarnation process and the need to understand it and to deal with it. But then there is another higher level of the antakarana connecting our lower mind with the higher mind and with the pure soul or the spiritual triad. So again, as we are building the antakarana, we are also finding a reestablishment of pure flow of sort of divine energy from soul levels that is healing to the soul and eventually to the physical body, to the astral, to the mental. So physical and mental health and harmony. So we live indeed within energy fields of all sorts, and we have all sorts of consequences for what we do within those energy fields. Now, as I said, thought is fundamental. It's fundamental to understand where it comes from and who is thinking when we think. Again, if we think from soul levels, this is fundamental for us to have power for all things in our lives. But then we have lots of the time buzzing thoughts that are not powerful, are not deep, are just replicas of thoughts already existing in the global psychic atmosphere. So it's fundamental for us to become really deeply aware, conscious of what we are doing, who we are being in the moment we think, and we move and we act and we feel. So self, deep inner work is fundamental in many ways. And it becomes even complex because, again, to Alice Bailey, the level of intuition the intuitional layer of the cosmic structure is the cosmic ether. So our typical personal chakras belong in the physical ether body, but perhaps the deep, real roots of the chakras belong in the cosmic ether, where perhaps we find the vitality of the gods, and where cosmic vitality might eventually be manipulated, as it is probably by those we call masters of wisdom. This is the main thing I wanted to talk about, aiming for people to notice that this is complex, but it's also adventurous, and it's also very nice to find progressively more about this. So when we talk about the higher self, it's good to know that there is a lot to find there. It's not just a vague thing that inspires us. It's not just a temporary thing. Perhaps there is a real lot, a wisdom to be acquired about higher layers of who we are, and indeed probably about who we really are, our deep reality. Because as the Buddhist says, there is a point of view of illusion, there is a point of view of relative reality, and there is a point of view of absolute reality. I suspect that the point of view of absolute reality goes even deeper in a way than maps of consciousness, that knowing about chakras, that finding ways to understand more about space and time. It goes towards eternity, towards something that does not need healing because it is just there. Well, I don't want to take more time. I'm very happy to participate. I hope you sort of enjoyed this. Love to all, and I'll be around.